I was just a factory worker in another galaxy, the kind no one ever notices. Then an alien queen looked at me and said, I choose the human. In that moment, I realized surviving would no longer be about staying invisible. The shift bell sang its polite little chime, the kind designed by committee to offend no species, and he lifted his hands from the assembly rail without urgency. No one rushed when the bell rang. Rushing suggested you believed something interesting might happen next, and experience had trained that instinct out of him years ago. The line slowed, then stopped, each worker standing where they always stood, breathing the same recycled air, waiting for the supervisors to pretend they were counting heads. He flexed his fingers and felt the faint hum of the gravity field through his boots, a reminder that this planet never quite trusted bodies to behave on their own. He had once tried to count how many identical units he had assembled in his life. He stopped when the number became depressing rather than impressive. The components slid past him now, dormant, obedient, far more certain of their purpose than he felt of his own. He fitted a crystal lattice into a housing, sealed it, sent it on its way, and wondered, as he often did, if somewhere in the galaxy a spectacular catastrophe would someday be traced back to a tiny mistake made by a human who hadn't slept enough and who had been thinking about lunch. Lunch was protein paste today. It was always protein paste today. He liked to imagine that somewhere, someone was eating something crunchy out of spite. A ripple moved through the factory that had nothing to do with the machinery. It began as a pause in conversation, then the quiet kind of silence that crept in sideways. He looked down the line and saw supervisors standing straighter than usual, which meant either an inspection or a disaster. Disaster usually came with alarms, so inspection it was. He sighed internally. Inspections meant smiling faces and the illusion of choice. Then the lights shifted, not off, never off, just subtly altered, as if the factory itself had decided to inhale. The gravity field adjusted by a fraction, enough to make his stomach notice. Something large moved beyond the partitioned transparent steel walls, and for the first time in months, he felt a flicker of curiosity strong enough to be mildly inconvenient. The procession entered like a rumor made solid. Guards first, not the kind that looked at workers as threats, but the kind that looked through them, as if violence was something they reserved for more meaningful shapes. Machinery hushed itself without being told. The supervisor's smiles froze into expressions that suggested reverence rather than compliance. He realized belatedly that he was still holding a component. Someone hissed his name from down the line, a warning shaped like panic. He set the piece down and straightened, wiping his hands on his uniform out of habit. He did not bow. No one had ever taught him how, and guessing felt risky. She walked at the center of it all, unhurried, as though time was something she permitted rather than endured. She looked human enough to make his brain comfortable, and alien enough to make it uneasy. Her long ears curved back elegantly, not hidden, not ornamental, responding with subtle movements that suggested they were listening to more than sound. Her gaze passed over machines, workers, guards, weighing nothing, dismissing everything until it stopped. On him, he waited for it to move on. It didn't. The moment stretched, then twisted into something absurd. He smiled. He couldn't help it. It was the same smile he used when a supervisor accused him of enthusiasm, polite, non-threatening, vaguely apologetic. One of her ears tilted. That was when things went wrong. She said something quietly, and the air seemed to rearrange itself to listen. A translator node near the ceiling pulsed, struggled, then surrendered. The words arrived in his mind with a clarity that felt invasive. Choose this one. He glanced behind him, certain there was a more impressive option nearby. There was. The line stared at him as if he had just been promoted to a role involving explosions. A guard approached. He considered making a joke. He decided against it when the guard stopped close enough that personal space became a nostalgic concept. The guard gestured. He pointed at himself, a universal sign for disbelief across most of known space. The guard did not laugh. He was escorted away, still trying to understand which rule he had broken. His thoughts tumbled over one another, searching for a memory of outstanding bravery or secret heroism, and finding only late shifts and an unfortunate incident involving a malfunctioning sterilizer. As they moved, he caught a glimpse of her again, already turning away, interest apparently satisfied. One ear flicked, almost amused. The transport that took him out of the factory smelled like clean metal and decisions made without consent. He sat, hands folded, and watched the city slide past through polarized glass. Towers curved toward a sky that changed color like it couldn't commit. He had lived here for years without ever being invited upward. Now he was ascending so quickly his ears popped, which felt unfair. No one explained anything. This was, oddly, reassuring. Explanations usually meant trouble. When the transport finally stopped, he stepped into a space that hummed with restrained power. Floors responded to footsteps. Walls remembered conversations. He resisted the urge to apologize to the architecture. He was led through corridors that grew brighter and quieter until both concepts seemed ceremonial. She waited. Up close, the differences sharpened. The long ears framed her face with a grace that made his own limbs feel excessively opinionated. Her eyes held a depth that suggested she was already several conclusions ahead of him and mildly entertained by the distance. She studied him in silence long enough that he wondered if this was a test. "So," he said, because silence had always been his enemy, "I assume this is about my outstanding performance with industrial lattice housings." One ear lifted. The other followed a heartbeat later. "Interesting," she said, not unkindly. He had the sudden, irrational sense that his life had just been reassigned without consulting him, and that somehow, inexplicably, this was only the beginning. They gave him new clothes without asking his opinion, which felt rude considering he had survived in the same uniform for years. The fabric adjusted itself as he moved, tightening where it shouldn't and loosening where it definitely shouldn't, until he stood very still and decided breathing was optional. A thin band settled around his wrist and hummed with quiet authority. When he tried to remove it, it politely informed him that this would be unhealthy. He decided to take its word for it. The palace seemed determined to confuse him through excess. Corridors curved in ways that suggested they were growing rather than built. Servitors glided past, carrying data and objects with equal reverence, and none of them acknowledged him except to subtly avoid colliding with his existence. Guards flanked him again, different ones this time, these with expressions trained into neutrality so perfectly it felt aggressive. He tried to keep track of where he was going. He failed almost immediately. The Queen walked ahead of him now, unescorted, as if the concept of danger had been discouraged from approaching her. Her long ears shifted now and then, reacting to things he couldn't hear, or perhaps things she didn't bother to say aloud. He wondered briefly if she ever got tired of being listened to by an entire building. They stopped in a chamber that made his sense of scale quietly panic. The floor responded to her presence, light blooming beneath her steps. When she turned, the light waited a fraction of a second before deciding whether it should follow. "You are uncomfortable," she said. "Yes," he replied, relieved to be asked something with an obvious answer. "I find that helps me stay humble." One ear angled forward. Humor, then. Unexpected. She circled him slowly, not predatory, just observant, like someone inspecting an object they hadn't yet decided whether to keep. He resisted the urge to rotate in place to keep facing her. That seemed like the wrong move. "You do not fear me," she said. "I do," he said. "I just grew up learning that panicking rarely improves a situation. Also, I'm fairly sure you could have me vaporized with a thought, so screaming feels redundant." That earned him a pause. Her gaze lingered, sharpened. The air felt thicker, as if the room itself was curious now. "You will be my personal guard." The words landed without ceremony. He waited for the part where someone laughed. No one did. "I don't know how," he said carefully, To guard, personally or otherwise, I once lost a fight with an automatic door. You are alive, she replied. That suggests adaptability. He considered this. That door was badly designed. Her ears tilted back, then relaxed. Approval, perhaps, or tolerance. She gestured and the room rearranged itself, surfaces sliding into places that suggested meetings rather than judgments. He was guided to a seat that adjusted before he could sit incorrectly. He missed chairs that let you fail. Others entered. Advisors, officials, beings whose authority radiated in ways he couldn't quantify. They looked at him like a problem someone else had ordered. Conversations began that included him grammatically but not substantively. He listened, absorbing words like security protocols, probability fields, temporal redundancies. He understood none of it and nodded anyway, which had gotten him through most of his adult life. At one point, a figure leaned toward the Queen and spoke too softly for the translators. Her ears flattened. "No," she said. "Precisely because he is not one of you." Silence followed, dense and uncomfortable. He resisted the urge to apologize for existing again. Hours, or something pretending to be hours passed. He was tested without being told. Doors closed unexpectedly. Floors shifted. Information arrived late or not at all. Each time, he reacted the only way he knew how, by adjusting, by making do, by occasionally muttering commentary under his breath that no one was supposed to hear. The wristband pulsed when he nearly walked into a restricted zone. He stopped, peered at the invisible barrier and sighed. "I respect your boundaries," he told it. Later, alone in a smaller chamber that seemed to be waiting for him specifically, he finally felt the weight of what had happened. The quiet pressed in, different from factory quiet. This one expected something of him. He sat, hands folded, and laughed softly, the sound startling in the stillness. "Personal guard," he said to no one. "Of course." When she entered again without announcement, he was mid-laugh. He stopped abruptly, embarrassed. "Am I amusing?" she asked. "Yes," he said honestly, "terrifyingly so." She studied him for a long moment. Then she sat closer than before. The light adjusted, careful not to intrude. "You will learn," she said, "or you will fail. Both outcomes are informative." "That's comforting," he said, in a deeply unsettling way. One ear flicked unmistakably, humor again. And beneath it something else. Interest, perhaps even hope. He realized then that whatever he had been before, a factory worker, a background detail, had been quietly erased. And in its place stood something untested, unqualified, and very much in danger of becoming important. By the time the alarms finally decided to be honest, he was already awake. They sang through the palace in layered tones, each frequency arguing politely with the others about the nature of emergency. He lay still for a moment, listening, counting the patterns the way he once counted conveyor belts. The wristband warmed, then tightened slightly as if clearing its throat. Threat probability rising, it informed him. "Thank you," he whispered. "I was worried today might be relaxing." He moved before the corridors finished reconfiguring themselves, trusting instincts that had never been trained for heroism, only survival. Somewhere behind the walls, the palace shifted its defenses, folding space in small, expensive ways. He ran anyway because running had always been his solution to problems that didn't come with instructions. He reached her chamber just as the doors sealed. He slapped his palm against the surface, felt the energy field resist, then flicker. The band pulsed. The door reconsidered. Inside, she stood calm amid controlled chaos, her long ears angled sharply, tracking signals he couldn't perceive. Advisors spoke over one another, projecting data into the air like accusations. When she saw him, the noise softened as if embarrassed. "You are late," she said. "I had to argue with a hallway," he replied. "It thought I should be somewhere else." One ear twitched despite herself. The threat resolved itself quickly after that, not because it was simple, but because it was familiar. A faction that believed tradition should outweigh survival. an attempt to fold a blade through a probability gap that no longer existed. He watched the plan unravel in real time, noticing something no one else seemed to. The timing was wrong. "Now," he said suddenly. Nothing happened. He frowned. "I might be wrong," he added, "which would be consistent with my experience." The floor beneath them shimmered as the real attempt revealed itself, not where expected, but where no one had bothered to look. He moved without thinking, not fast, not elegant, just present. He stood between her and the collapsing field, the band screaming warnings that felt almost affectionate. The world bent. Then it snapped back, annoyed. Silence followed, broken only by the sound of his breath and a soft, incredulous laugh from one of the advisors. He was still standing. Security flooded the chamber, too late to matter. The conspirators were exposed, contained, their certainty evaporating under the weight of having underestimated someone unimportant. Later, much later, when the palace had settled and the corridors stopped gossiping, he sat across from her in a room that no longer tested him. She watched him with an expression that felt new. "You saw what others did not," she said. "I wasn't trying," he said. "I just assumed things would go wrong in an unexpected way. That's been reliable so far." Her ears relaxed, lowering slightly. Relief unguarded. "You were chosen because you were invisible," she said. "Now you are not." He considered this. "I don't mind," he said slowly, "but I'd like to keep some of the quiet if possible." She smiled, small and genuine. The room brightened just a little. "You have changed," she said. "So have you," he replied, surprising himself. They stood together at the threshold of something steadier than before. The galaxy outside remained vast and complicated and entirely uninterested in fairness, but within the palace, patterns had shifted. A factory worker no longer assembled pieces he would never see whole. He understood now how parts became systems, how small adjustments mattered. When he left her presence that night, he walked the corridors without getting lost. The band on his wrist hummed content. He paused once, looking out over the city that